Imagine discovering that the most influential book in human history was based on mistakes, legends, and copied stories. Would Christianity, one of the world's largest religions, collapse? Or imagine the opposite. What if the Bible is actually one of the most well-preserved and historically supported documents ever written? The answer matters because billions of people have built their lives around its message. So today, we're exploring one of the most important questions anyone can ask. Is the Bible reliable? And the answer may be more complicated and more fascinating than you think. Welcome back to Sacred Questions, the channel where we explore difficult questions about faith, God, Christianity, and the Bible with honesty, curiosity, and respect. Whether you're a committed Christian, a skeptic, someone deconstructing faith, or simply curious, this conversation is for you. When people ask whether the Bible is reliable, they're often asking several different questions at once. Did the biblical authors accurately record what happened? Has the text been preserved correctly? Can we trust the stories? Were books removed or changed? And perhaps most importantly, can a book written thousands of years ago still tell us something true about God and reality today? Let's explore the evidence, the objections, and the deeper questions behind them. Before we can answer the question, we need to define it. When historians talk about reliability, they aren't asking whether every reader agrees with a text. They're asking whether a document has been accurately transmitted and whether it provides trustworthy information about the events it describes. These are actually two separate issues. First, did the original authors write what we think they wrote? Second, were the original claims true? A newspaper can accurately preserve a story that contains false information. Likewise, a perfectly preserved ancient text isn't automatically historically accurate. So when discussing the Bible, we need to separate the reliability of the text itself from the truthfulness of its claims. That's an important distinction many conversations overlook. Supporters of the Bible's reliability often point to something remarkable. The Bible is not a single book. It's a collection of books written over roughly 1,500 years by dozens of authors from different backgrounds. Kings, prophets, fishermen, scholars, shepherds, and government officials all contributed to its pages. Yet despite that diversity, Christians argue that a unified story emerges. A story about humanity, God, brokenness, redemption, and hope. But what about preservation? One of the strongest arguments concerns manuscript evidence. For the New Testament alone, scholars possess thousands of ancient manuscripts and manuscript fragments. Compared with many ancient works that historians routinely trust, the New Testament has an unusually large amount of textual evidence. This doesn't mean every manuscript is identical. There are variations between copies, but textual scholars can compare these manuscripts to reconstruct the original text with a high degree of confidence. Many scholars, including some who are not Christians, agree that we generally know what the original New Testament authors wrote. Then there's archaeology. Over the centuries, archaeological discoveries have repeatedly confirmed the existence of people, places, cities, and cultural details mentioned in the Bible. Now, archaeology does not prove miracles happened. Finding evidence for an ancient city doesn't prove a supernatural event occurred there. But supporters argue that these discoveries increase confidence that the biblical authors were writing about real historical settings rather than fictional worlds. For many believers, these factors create a cumulative case. The Bible appears rooted in history, preserved with remarkable care, and connected to real people and places. But there are serious objections as well, and intellectual honesty requires taking them seriously. Critics often point to apparent contradictions. Different gospel accounts sometimes emphasize different details. Chronologies can seem difficult to reconcile. Certain passages raise questions about historical accuracy. Then there is the issue of miracles. Many skeptics argue that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Stories about resurrections, divine interventions, and supernatural events naturally invite skepticism. Others question the process through which the biblical books were collected. Why were some writings included while others were excluded? Was politics involved? Did church leaders shape the Bible to fit their own agendas? These are important questions. Most historians agree that the process of forming the biblical canon was complex and unfolded over centuries. Christians generally argue that the church recognized books already regarded as authoritative rather than inventing authority for them. Critics often see the process differently. And then there's a deeper philosophical issue. Our conclusions about the Bible are often influenced by what we already believe is possible. If someone begins with the assumption that miracles cannot happen, then biblical miracle accounts will almost certainly be rejected. If someone believes God exists and can act in history, those same accounts may seem far more plausible. Sometimes debates about the Bible are really debates about reality itself. One thing that often surprises people is that scholars disagree on many things, but agree on others. Most historians agree that Jesus existed. Most agree that early Christians genuinely believed they witnessed the risen Jesus. Most agree that the New Testament documents were written relatively close to the events they describe compared to many ancient sources. Where disagreement begins is in explaining those facts. Were the resurrection accounts true? Were the experiences visionary, legendary, something else? The evidence is often shared. The interpretations differ. That's why discussions about biblical reliability rarely end with a single undeniable proof. Instead, they involve weighing evidence, assumptions, and worldviews. Perhaps the most interesting question isn't whether every challenge to the Bible has been solved. The deeper question is whether the Bible has earned the right to be taken seriously. For billions of people throughout history, the answer has been yes. They have found in its pages wisdom, meaning, hope, and a compelling vision of God. Others remain unconvinced. And that's understandable. Faith and skepticism both involve questions that cannot be entirely escaped. The believer must ask whether faith is justified. The skeptic must ask whether skepticism itself has limits. The Bible remains one of the most examined, criticized, studied, loved, and debated books ever written. And perhaps that alone is worth reflecting on. A book thousands of years old continues to shape conversations, cultures, and individual lives across the world. Very few books can make that claim. So, is the Bible reliable? The answer depends partly on what evidence you find persuasive, and partly on the assumptions you bring to the question. But one thing is certain: the question deserves serious thought, and the search for truth is always worth pursuing. If you enjoyed this exploration, subscribe to Sacred Questions for more thoughtful discussions about faith, God, Christianity, doubt, and the biggest questions humans have ever asked. And now I'd love to hear from you. Do you believe the Bible is reliable? Why or why not? Share your thoughts respectfully in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next Sacred Question.